anyone who follows Jesus lives a better life. And he says, come, I will give you a whole new life and a whole new way of life.
My name is Peter Duck. I'm a member of the church here. And this week, in our Immerse Bible readings that we've been doing together as a church, we came to the last third of the book of Numbers. Now, if you read along through there, I'm sure you're wondering what is going to be chosen from this section to preach about, because there are a few dry portions in there. We had another census. We also had a list of every place the Israelites camped during their 40 years in the wilderness. We had the boundaries for the promised land, some detailed regulations about inheritances, offerings, and vows. So you're wondering, what could we get from this to apply to our lives today? Well, I can promise you it will be something interesting, it will be relevant, and it will be challenging. It's a topic that actually does not come easily for me. The last time I was up here preaching, we looked at Abraham. Do you remember what we said was his famous quality? He was a man of faith. And this morning, we're going to discuss another Old Testament character we can learn something important from. We're going to talk about Joshua. I know that we're still in Numbers. We're not at the book of Joshua, but we did hear him mention in that passage that Ashlyn read for us. And Joshua is actually talked about a lot throughout the first 5 books of the Bible in the Pentateuch. So his name does come up, and I thought this would be a good time to reflect on something that kind of defines his character. We usually think of Joshua coming on the scene as a spy, like Travis was speaking about last week, one of the 12 who was sent into the promised land to scope out the place. We also think about the things he does later on, when he leads the Israelites across the Jordan River, when he marches around Jericho, and he commands the army in the book named after him as they take the promised land. But I think that you will be a little bit surprised, as I was, when you get looking for it, that he pops up a lot earlier and a lot more often than you might have thought. And there is one quality that comes to light with him at every turn. If Abraham was known for his faith, what is the one word that comes to mind when you think about Joshua? Any ideas? I heard the word courage out there. That's what I was thinking of too. Courage. Joshua is known as the courageous one. The most well-known phrase that we think about when we talk about Joshua is all about courage. Be strong and courageous. And that is why I say that this is not an easy topic for me. If you know me well, or even if you only know me a little, you're probably thinking this is a mismatch. Who am I to speak about courage? Who am I to speak about strength? I'm unqualified. A few weeks ago, my wife and I went on a trip around the world to Thailand. And one thing I like to do when I visit a new place is to go to the parks. The thrifty side of me likes that they are free. But I also find that you get a fascinating insight into what the local people experience, what they value. Well, there was something in this park in Bangkok that I had never seen before, anywhere in the world. In between the trees and the benches and the walking paths, there were guys pumping iron. Right out in the open air, there were dozens of weightlifting benches. You can see it on a picture on the screen. There were barbells everywhere. There were rusty weight plates strewn on the ground. And you could tell from looking at the people there that they valued strength. That is how they spend their free time. It's not the kind of place I gravitate towards. I actually had to Google what you call those things that you put at the end of a barbell. Weight plates, right? That's what it told me anyway. When you look at me, there's no way you're thinking that guy values strength. And that is not just true in a physical sense. I'm not courageous at all. I live in constant timidity, hiding, and avoidance, even cowardice, I would say. Over 51 years of life, I've been a great example of weakness. What are you afraid of? Well, I'm sure each and every one of you has some phobia. For me, 3 things come to mind. The first one is snakes. True, I have watched and enjoyed the Anaconda movies. The original one came out when I was in university, and I watched the reboot that came out recently. But if I ever see a snake in real life, look out. They've always given me the creeps. I'm actually terrified of them, and I feel it makes all the sense in the world that Satan appeared as a snake in the Garden of Eden. The second thing I'm afraid of is water. My parents put me in swimming lessons when I was a kid, and I remember being petrified the day they had us walk down to the diving board and go out to the end, and we were supposed to jump off into the arms of our instructor who would catch us in the deep end of the pool. I was just so scared of that, and I took this beginner class 3 times and failed it 3 times until I begged not to go back. Even today, if I'm at the beach or a swimming pool, my view is going to look something like this. The pool's way over there. I'm on dry ground. I just don't see the upside, the fun of going in the death trap over there. So during that trip to Thailand, we had a chance to visit an elephant sanctuary. My wife, Jolynn, was right in there, in the 2-foot deep pool, helping to bathe the animals. I was on dry land, the official photographer. I don't need to go in the water, thank you. The third thing that I'm afraid of is conflict. And this may be a pathological fear. If there's any chance of a testy exchange, of rejection, of a fight of any kind, I am out of there. You've heard of fight or flight? Well, for me, there's no doubt about it. At the first hint of conflict, I am on my way to the airport and I am flying out of there. And I have an example of this from our visit to Bangkok as well. We went to a market, the kind of place where there's a bit of room for bargaining, where the prices are not set in stone. So when Jolynn started haggling with the vendors, I sidled a couple of stalls away, let her take care of that. I didn't want to hear her offer being rejected. I feel a little silly even saying this out loud, but it happened. And one more example of this. Last summer, our sweet little dog, Mickey, isn't he sweet? He got a hold of some kind of varmint in our backyard. My wife pleaded with me to intervene, to spare the life of this critter, but I was physically unable to. I could not bring myself to even look at the fight. My feet were as though they were stuck in cement on the deck. That was conflict at its most visceral, primal, animal level, and I could not be a part of it. Even after it was over and the groundhog, we think it was a groundhog anyway, that was dead, I needed help from my kids to pick it up with a shovel and put it in a garbage bag. I was quaking. I couldn't explain why I was so mortified then. I was asked for an explanation. And the best I can do months later is to put it in this box of conflict avoidance. So I tell you all of this as a disclaimer as we begin. I am not the person you want to see up here on the stage giving tips on courage. It's almost as ridiculous as a speech on courage from this guy on the video. Look at the screen.
Courage. What makes a king out of a slave? Courage. What makes the flag on the mast to wave? Courage. What makes the elephant charge his tusk in the misty mist or the dusky dusk? What makes the muskrat guard his musk? Courage. What makes the Sphinx the seventh wonder? Courage. What makes the dawn come up like thunder? Courage. What have they got that I ain't got? Courage. You could say that again.
So we are not going to be looking to the Cowardly Lion for insight on courage. We are going to look at Joshua, who racked up a solid track record in this area. So let's examine his resume and see his courage credentials. The first time we encounter Joshua is in the book of Exodus, chapter 17. If you have your Immerse Bibles with you, that's on page 111. Life as slaves in Egypt and the experience of reaching freedom by crossing the Red Sea were still fresh in everyone's minds. It was no more than 2 months after they had left Egypt. This was a group of maybe a couple million people. They appeared to be walking aimlessly into the desert with all kinds of valuables, livestock, clothing, silver and gold jewelry. And the Bible tells us that they had stripped the Egyptians of their wealth as they were leaving by asking for all these fancy goods. So they had some loot on them. What it does not mention is weapons. They didn't have to actually fight Pharaoh's army when they got away. In fact, when they were being cornered alongside the Red Sea, it doesn't sound like this group of people could have engaged in any kind of military battle. They reacted with fear and panic. So just a few weeks later, out in the wilderness now, they looked like an easy target. And they attracted the attention of warriors from Amalek. This was a nation of tribal nomads. They came and attacked the people of Israel. So Moses turned to Joshua. He tells him to choose some men and go and fight the army of Amalek. It doesn't sound like Joshua is a general. It doesn't sound like there's any organization in place, no military machine. That's not something Israel was set up for. But Joshua did not protest. He raised no objections. Joshua did what Moses had commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Certainly, that took courage. The next time we hear about Joshua, a few chapters later, Exodus 24, the people are camped at Mount Sinai. God is ready to hand down the tablets of stone with his commands written on them. Moses is invited to come up on the mountain, and the Lord tells him to bring along his brother Aaron the priest, 2 of Aaron's sons, and 70 of Israel's elders. Joshua is part of this entourage. We're told that Joshua now has the status of being Moses' assistant. Now, there were strict instructions about how close people could get to the Lord. A few days earlier, when Moses had his first encounters with God, the people were warned, be careful. Do not go up on the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountain will certainly be put to death. Warn the people not to break through the boundaries to see the Lord, or they will die. Severe consequences. And when God's glory came in the form of lightning, thunder, dense cloud, fire, smoke, and an earthquake, the result was fear and trembling in the people, naturally. It was an unsettling experience, unnerving. The people were coached to treat God's presence with the utmost respect. And when they experienced his presence, they understood why. But here's Joshua, not many days afterward, setting out to actually climb that same mountain with about 75 other guys, because now the Lord invited them to. That would have taken courage. They were probably half expecting to be zapped, but it turned out okay. They were not only not zapped, they got a whole lot more than they could have dreamed. They didn't just see smoke and lightning. We read, they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet, there seemed to be a surface of brilliant blue lapis lazuli. That's a gemstone, as clear as the sky itself. Can you imagine? They saw God. And this lines up with another description in the Bible about what it's like to catch a glimpse of God. Ezekiel had a vision of the Almighty, and part of his description talks about something that looked like a throne made of blue lapis lazuli. So Joshua and the rest of the group on Mount Sinai got more than a fleeting glimpse. They actually gazed upon God, the Bible says. They looked and they looked. Their eyes feasted on the Lord. And yet, God did not destroy them. As Moses wrote down this account later, that part was a marvel to him. It's what he would have expected. Instead, he wrote, they ate a covenant meal, eating and drinking in God's presence. It was too good to be true. Were they wondering when the shoe was going to drop? At any time, they might realize that they'd gone a step too far. As they ate and drank, were they looking over their shoulders? Are we sure this is okay? And they must have had so much joy as it dawned on them that it was okay. This is where God wanted them to be. All of this, though, called for courage. And Joshua would need more than the 70 elders and Aaron and his sons, because once those guys were cleaning up the dishes, as it were, the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain to get the tablets of stone. And while everybody else hung back, Joshua alone went on to that next level of closeness to God's glory. For 6 days, the holy cloud covered the mountain. On the 7th day, the Lord called Moses into the cloud, which appeared to be a consuming fire. Moses actually disappeared as he walked into the cloud. And who was it who was there in the position to see Moses disappear and describe that? Only Joshua. And Moses, he stayed in that cloud for 40 days, getting not only the tablets of stone, but all kinds of specific instructions about building the tabernacle. So for almost 6 weeks, Joshua would have been on his own, up on this mountain where he knows people are not always welcome. No timeline for when Moses is coming back. Again, the guy needed courage. Well, now let's skip down to the book of Numbers. This episode is one of the most famous involving Joshua, and we are talking about when he became a spy in Numbers 13. If you're in the Immerse book, that's on page 226. The assignment, should they choose to accept it, was to sneak into the land of Canaan to scope things out. Moses had a checklist for them. Find out whether the people that living there are strong or weak, few or many. See what kind of land they live in. Is it good or bad? Do their towns have walls, or are they unprotected, like open camps? Is the soil fertile or poor? Are there many trees? Do your best to bring back some samples of the crops you see. So the assumption behind all of those instructions is that this land would soon be theirs. The Lord had promised it to them. This was just going to be something to help them get organized so they could pounce. It was an opportunity to see that God had great things in store for them. But it would have taken courage just to set out on this expedition. If you've seen any spy movies, you know there is danger as part of the job description. They were walking into hostile territory. And when they actually got there and had a look around, there was even more cause for alarm. According to the official report filed to Moses afterward, the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there. So Joshua saw all that. But, courageous guy that he was undaunted. He was on board with the one other brave spy, Caleb, whose advice was, let's go at once to take the land. We can certainly conquer it. So that was the next great example of Joshua's courage, giving that minority report. It's always easier to go along with a crowd. If you're in a meeting where a prevailing opinion is, we can't go up against them, they're stronger than we are, you need courage to raise your hand and make an impassioned argument that everybody else is wrong. But that is what Joshua and Caleb did. And boy, did it ever get a response. And I'm not just talking about dirty looks from the other spies. The whole community began to talk about stoning Joshua and Caleb. The Lord and Moses did step in, and these courageous dissenters were saved, but it is this incident which led the Lord to decree that nobody was going into the promised land until the whole generation of adults died off. 38 years later, when that happened, only Joshua and Caleb survived to enjoy the blessings of Canaan, those luscious grapes Travis was telling us about last week, the figurative milk and honey that they had seen on the spy mission. Well, now we've made it back to our root text, which Ashlyn read for us this morning, Numbers 27. Is there some courage here? Well, let's see. Joshua here is tapped to take on the top job, leading the people of Israel after the death of Moses. Do you think that's a job you would want to take on after reading what we've read through the earlier books of the Bible? Well, we see that accepting this job was yet another marker of Joshua's courage, because no one had been closer to Moses than Joshua was for all those years. So he was there to see up close what a thankless job it was. All the complaining, the defiance, and the insubordination toward leadership, the frequent disloyalty to God, and the need to try to smooth things over with the Lord on behalf of this unruly bunch. Again, Joshua said yes. And he would continue to lead the people with courage and faithfulness. It is beyond the scope of our series in the Pentateuch, but I'm sure you can think of those other life experiences Joshua had, which would have needed courage. The crossing of the Jordan, following God's unorthodox battle plan at Jericho, the rest of the battles that would come. So it's no fluke that Joshua has this reputation for courage. It was part of his DNA. But what I want us to consider now is this. Where did that courage come from? How was Joshua prepared to boldly lead? How was he able to take a stand when others folded? Where did he get his confidence that made him strong and courageous? What is Joshua's secret? Well, it is one simple thing, just one ingredient. I don't have a list of points to take down because this is just one point. The answer can be found every time that Joshua hears or utters the phrase that would become his motto, be strong and courageous. If we turn to the closing chapters of Deuteronomy, the last book in the Pentateuch, we get to the point where the death of Moses is imminent. Joshua had been named leader in numbers, but now it's time for him to be taking over officially and to be commissioned. On page 318 in your Immerse Bible, as Moses is explaining to the people that it is Joshua who will lead them across the Jordan River, he says this, "The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy the nations living there, and you will take possession of their land." Then Moses called for Joshua, and as Israel watched, he said to them, "Be strong and courageous, for you will lead these people into the land. Do not be afraid or discouraged." Why? For the Lord will personally go ahead of you. He will be with you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you. As it says in another Bible translation, he will not leave you nor forsake you. I had an experience a couple days ago, kind of a late-breaking illustration that I thought would fit here. When we hear that God will not leave us or forsake us, sometimes we get left, we get forsaken. Sometimes we leave or forsake. The other night, my daughter needed some groceries at the Metro store in the mall, and she asked my wife and I, who had been at the gym, to come and meet her there because we had a bunch of grocery bags in the back of our vehicle. So we did. So there's two vehicles there parked on different parts of the parking lot. And when we're loading the things into our daughter's vehicle, it's very cold. It's always very cold now, have you noticed? I assumed that my wife would get into my daughter's vehicle because why would she want to go all the way across the parking lot to get in the one she came in when it's so cold? So she's probably just going to get into my daughter's vehicle, right? Well, I drove home. My daughter drove home. We get out in our driveway, and I ask, "Where's your mother?" "I thought she was with you." "Well, I thought she was with you." We actually left her standing in the freezing parking lot at 9 o'clock at night as she was like, hey. There's a verse in Isaiah that says, can a mother forget her nursing child? Never. Can she feel no love for the child she has borne? But even if that were possible, I would not forget you. It is possible for a husband to forget that his wife is in the parking lot of the grocery store. But it is not possible for the Lord to forget you. It is not possible for him to forsake you if you are his child. So Moses said, "Be strong and courageous" to the people, and then he said the same thing to Joshua, and then God himself speaks and gives Joshua the same message directly from a pillar of cloud, no less. The Lord commissioned Joshua with these words, "Be strong and courageous." Why? I will be with you. Are you getting the idea that this is Joshua's life verse? If you were to keep reading into the book of Joshua, you would see the Lord repeating that to him 3 more times after Moses died, 3 times in the space of 4 verses. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people. Be strong and very courageous. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. Why? For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And finally, Joshua will take up the phrase himself to encourage his army. He says, don't ever be afraid or discouraged. Joshua told his men, be strong and courageous. Why? For the Lord is going to do this to all your enemies. The key to courage is a concept we've been talking about a lot in this series. It's something We talk about at Christmas time. It's something that we sang about earlier this morning. Emmanuel, God is with us. As Paul writes in the New Testament, if God is for us, who can ever be against us? So Joshua has this truth, this wonderful reminder spoken over him again and again. He will be with you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you. I will be with you. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. The presence of God is what makes all the difference. Knowing he is there will change everything about your outlook. And the interesting thing about how this played out in the life of Joshua is this. Those words, be strong and courageous, and their connection to God's presence, that's something we never hear until the end of the road through the wilderness. So where did Joshua get the courage we saw all through the earlier steps along the way? I find this fascinating. Once you start looking for it, it is striking. Joshua's whole life was lived in the light of the presence of God. Every time Joshua is mentioned throughout Exodus and Numbers, we also see God's obvious presence is close at hand. In that early battle with the Amalekite army, which Joshua led, what was it that gave him the victory? This was the battle when Moses held up his staff. As long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. Moses, he got tired of holding up his arms. A battle is not a quick thing. So a couple of other guys, Aaron and Hur, positioned themselves next to Moses and helped him hold up that staff. And what was so special about the staff? It was the same thing Moses used to strike the water of the Nile to turn it into blood. That staff was also used to call down several other plagues in Egypt. And right before the battle with the Amalekites, God instructed Moses to use that same staff to strike a rock and provide water when the people were complaining about being thirsty. Moses named that place Massah and Meribah, words that meant test and arguing. And the logic was that it was a place where the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord here with us or not? It was a referendum on God's presence. So Moses' staff became a symbol that, yes, God was with them. He was their helper, their sustainer, their provider. This was his mission, and he would see them through. And that's why holding up the staff made all the difference in the battle. God was with his people. It was his presence that determined the outcome, giving them the victory. I don't know if Joshua realized this in the heat of the battle, but can you imagine him hearing the story afterward and putting two and two together? Those terrifying moments when we were being pushed back. It was because God was not fighting for us. The glorious times when we could see the tide turn back in our favor, that was God. He was with us. We already discussed how intimately Joshua was acquainted with God's presence at Mount Sinai. Just think what it would have been like for Joshua to be the first person to see those tablets when Moses came out of that cloud again. Would he have touched them as they were walking down the mountain? Would he have dared to trace his finger in the letters inscribed there by God's own hand? Now, there is another mention of Joshua in Exodus that I skipped over earlier, but it shows how central God's presence was in his life. Before the official tabernacle was built, they had something called a tent of meeting. Between the smashing of the first stone tablets and God giving them a new set, we're told that it was Moses' practice to take the tent of meeting and set it up some distance from the camp. Everyone who wanted to make a request of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent of meeting, all the people would get up and stand in the entrances of their own tents. They would all watch Moses until he disappeared inside. As he went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and hover at its entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. When the people saw the cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they would stand and bow down in front of their own tents. Inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Afterward, Moses would return to the camp, but listen to this. The young man who assisted him, Joshua, son of Nun, would remain behind in the tent of meeting. The translation here in the New Living Translation suggests that Joshua was right inside the tent while Moses was having these personal conversations with the Lord, because it says he would remain behind in the tent. Other versions make it sound like maybe he was just outside the flap. Like the ESV says that Joshua would not depart from the tent. The NIV says Joshua did not leave the tent. So it's ambiguous about whether he was at the tent or in the tent. Regardless, the thing I take away from this is that Joshua wanted more of the Lord's presence. He caught a whiff of it during the battle with the Amalekites. He saw it from a distance, along with the rest of the people, when God's glory shook the mountain. He feasted on it when he was up on Mount Sinai with the elders. He had 40 days to meditate on God's presence as he waited for Moses to emerge from the cloud. He was there as Moses enjoyed sweet communion with the Lord in that tent. And when Moses was called back to his other duties as leader, Joshua stayed. He wanted to be in that place where God's glory was tangible. He loved to be with God. We're not told that Joshua was able to talk with God in the same way Moses did, but just imagine what being there did for his faith. What would those hours have been like at the tent all by himself? No doubt that time forged in Joshua the unwavering confidence in the Lord that shone through later with the spy mission. And what about that spy mission? When Joshua makes his courageous, impassioned speech, he's being fueled by his awareness of how real God is. Don't be afraid of the people of the land, he says. They are only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. And what happens immediately after this? Once the people start looking for stones to throw at Joshua and Caleb, the glorious presence of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites at the tabernacle. There it is again. Every time we hear about Joshua, we also see evidence of God's presence. And as Moses negotiates with the Lord, begging him not to disown the whole nation, God reveals the basis for the judgment he's about to hand down in keeping virtually everyone out of the promised land. It's all about how people responded to experiencing his glorious presence. God says this, as surely as the earth is filled with the Lord's glory, not one of these people will ever enter that land. They have all seen my glorious presence and the miraculous signs I performed, both in Egypt and in the wilderness. But again and again, they have tested me by refusing to listen to my voice. They will never even see the land I swore to give their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it. But my servant Caleb, and we can assume Joshua is covered here too, he has a different attitude than the others have. He has remained loyal to me, so I will bring him into the land he explored. Later in Numbers, when that whole generation had indeed died out, decades have passed, Moses was left to explain to this younger generation what had happened to the people of that day. And he contrasts Caleb and Joshua with the other spies this way. They have wholeheartedly followed the Lord. And we can read into that Caleb and Joshua continued in their pure devotion to God throughout another 38 years that passed after the watershed moment with the spies. It's important to point out here that Joshua had a choice to make. Yes, he did experience more of God's presence than others did, but the other spies and all the people of Israel had seen the glory of the Lord displayed as well. They had stood in front of the mountain. They'd seen the lightning. They'd heard the thunder, felt the ground move. They had tasted the manna. They'd smelled the salty water of the Red Sea as it stood up like walls of a tunnel, allowing them to escape Egypt. And yes, as the Lord himself said, the whole earth is filled with his glory to start with. His presence is actually everywhere because he is an omnipotent God. Paul writes in Romans, through everything God made, people can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. In nature, God puts himself on display, And the people of Israel were given so much more revelation than that. And that is why God saw this lack of courage as an affront. That's why he said that by chickening out, by balking at going in to take the promised land, they were treating him with contempt. Everyone has a choice to make. The other spies and all the people chose fear. Joshua chose courage. Both decisions flowed from their experience of God's presence. Most treated it with contempt. Joshua cherished God's presence. He held on to it. He counted on it. He savored it. And that made all the difference for him. Yes, it did increase his strength, his courage, his trust, and it sustained that confidence over a lifetime of challenges. But it did more. It meant that Joshua knew God. He heard God revealing himself, sharing his plans and his ways. It gave Joshua a sense of purpose. In our root text today, Ashlyn read that it was the Lord who handpicked Joshua to take over from Moses. Joshua knew from that day on he was to become the shepherd to God's people. And on that day, God left no doubt why Joshua was the one he chose, because Joshua has the Spirit in him. God's Holy Spirit is the ultimate way you and I can have that rock-solid, unwavering assurance of God's presence, that God is with us, that we don't have to be afraid. We can be strong, we can be courageous, because then we are relying on God, not ourselves. The Lord told Paul, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." So how is it possible to know God's presence in this deep personal way? It's not just a feeling you get from an inspiring worship set. The Holy Spirit comes to live inside you when you take your life and stake it on God by placing your full trust in Jesus, his Son. When you turn from sin in your life and believe that Jesus died to pay the penalty for every wrong thing you've ever done. If you have done that, you are a Christian, and you never have to doubt that God is with you. You can obey the Lord's command, be strong and courageous, knowing that he will never leave you in a grocery store parking lot or anywhere else. He will never forsake you. Listen to the words of Jesus. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. Listen to the words of Paul. I pray that from his glorious, unlimited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through his Spirit. And again, Paul writing to Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power. God is with you, Christian friends. You have no reason to be afraid or discouraged. No need to panic. And if you are feeling some of those things, maybe you need more of the antidote. God is inviting you into his presence, as we sang earlier, to experience his presence, to become more aware of his presence. He wants you to want him more. It is a message that rings out throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New. This is how David puts it in Psalm 27. You've said, seek my face. My heart says to you, God, your face, Lord, do I seek. Such a clear appeal in another song of David. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his presence continually. In the words of Jesus, remain in me. In the book of Hebrews, this encouragement, let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. Let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. And lastly, James puts the appeal so simply. Come close to God, and God will come close to you. Or in some other versions, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. We will do that through singing in just a moment. First, I want to give you just a little update on me and my fears. As you might have guessed, I was writing this sermon during that trip in Thailand, and I was struggling to come up with an illustration to talk about courage, maybe because I see myself being so utterly devoid of it. It felt wrong to talk about somebody else's strength without being honest about my own weaknesses. Well, I'm happy to report I had a little breakthrough, at least when it comes to water. We were at this hotel for 8 nights. I had not been in the pool once, not really interested. But I had some free time the last afternoon and I wanted to try it. That's what the pool looked like. See that round part at the end? Well, that is where I went. It was 2 feet deep. And so I went in there and, kicked around a little bit. The water was cold. It's always cold, isn't it? That's probably another reason why I find swimming unpleasant. Well, I waded around in that little circle part there. It's not a hot tub. It looks like it should be a hot tub. It was cold tub. And then I sat on the submerged wall that you can see dividing that circle from the rest of the pool. So I'm sitting on maybe 4 inches of water there with my legs down in it. And I ever so gradually started dipping myself lower and lower into the water, getting maybe an inch more of my torso wet each time. While I was doing this ridiculous little dance, another man jumped into the other end of the pool. Just like that. He was immediately completely wet. And I could sense the Lord saying to me at that moment, "Why are you being so timid? Jump in! You don't have to be this way." And I realized at that moment that I need to listen to my own preaching. God is with me. He invites me to be strong and courageous like Joshua, even in the inconsequential little fears and phobias I have, like going in the water. So I prayed right there, claiming the power of God's presence with me to face fear. I took the plunge. I got all wet all the way, and I had a great time in the pool, I must say. In communion with the Lord, I was swimming with the Lord, I felt. I floated, I did a lap, I did a bob. Actually, I did 2 bobs, and the second time I had my eyes open. If my swim instructor from Ridgetown in 1980 could see me, boy, he would have been impressed. I don't know what you are afraid of. Maybe it is a lot more serious than the fears that I just outlined to you. Or maybe you think your issues would sound silly too. I don't know. Whatever they are, God invites you to embrace his presence. And he promises to empower you to be strong and courageous, especially at your point of weakness, especially when you're willing to admit you need him. So let's go into his presence now as we close.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you were encouraged today. If you have any questions about Jesus, the Bible, or Heritage Park Alliance Church, please visit our website, hpac.org, where you can get connected.